To start with the first question, we are in a climate emergency. The current carbon budget for the world to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius and ensure a livable planet is about 350 gigatons. That will be used in about 8.5 years at our current emission rates. And expanding fossil fuel extraction is in no way compatible with this goal. Are you personally in favor of the expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline and other fossil fuel infrastructure? Please answer yes or no and give your reasons for that position. Yes or no answers to begin, please. Mr. Beach. Yeah, going down the row as we have been.
So I believe that it's my job, first and foremost, to represent our constituents. And that's why, when this came up for a vote in the House, I voted against the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And not just that, when the decision was first made, the Prime Minister came out and said that the most substantive and articulate critic on this particular project was a caucus colleague, myself. When I first got into office, I know a lot of the people here because you showed up in my office on the first day. And I have taken meetings with every single person and gone to every single protest where I've been in town, I haven't been in Ottawa. And I've taken that seriously. When the Trans Mountain hearings came down and went through Burnaby all 3 days, I was there all 3 days. And I submitted a report here that you can read online. But I was the only member of Parliament, by the way, from any party to be there. Because when issues get tough in this riding, I'm here to defend my constituents, and that is what I will always do.
You still say
Thank you. No comments, please, from the audience. Thank you. Yes.
Our People's Party of Canada's position is build pipeline, repeal 669, and repeal 648. And because the pipeline issue is controversial and a complex issue, it's probably touch 4 areas. The first one, economy. The second one, environment and safety. The third one is the unity, because Alberta, if you do the survey before, the 25 to 50% people would like to separate from this country. So, and of course, a compensation issue. So if you solve these 4 issues wisely, if people supposed to understand the pipeline is very crucial for our economy, for everybody. So our position is we need to build a pipeline. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, Ms. Goodner.
I am not in favor of the pipeline. I am not in favor of any fossil fuel infrastructure. I want to stop every project. I want to cancel every project that's in process, and I think we need to move the other way. And my reasons for this are, yeah, we're in a climate emergency. The question, I think, is the answer to this question. And there are many other reasons also why fossil fuel infrastructure is not smart. Safety is really clear in this community, and it's in my backyard, and I feel it. And also that we have pollution and health problems to do with it. And that's also clear in this community and, of course, across the world.
Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, and I made my position, I think, pretty clear in my opening statement. I am strongly, personally opposed, and opposed on behalf of the people of our community to the expansion of the pipeline. And I'm going to give the last 10 seconds of my time back to Terry Beach, because I'd like an answer to the question that was asked about his personal position on this issue. So please, leave 10 seconds for Terry to answer that. The fact of the matter is that we are in a climate emergency, there's no question about that, but you don't have a government that one day declares a climate emergency and the next day approves the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. That's just not on. And not only approves it, but spends $4.5 billion of taxpayers' money. So that's just not on. But Terry, your personal position.
Yeah, I think you have 15 there.
So I'm not against all other fossil fuel infrastructure. For example, the LNG project that's being proposed, that could shut down coal plants in China which burns at twice the inefficiency as those coal plants. And it can actually help us use the global warming, or fight the global warming fight. And fossil fuel infrastructure, new fossil fuel infrastructure, can be more efficient than current infrastructure and also help us with climate change. So just making a flat statement that you're against all fossil fuel infrastructure is irresponsible.
Thank you very much. And we'll move on now to the second prepared question. Many of the residents of the Burnaby North Seymour riding, especially those living near the tank farm and in the 5.2 kilometer toxic smoke zone, do not feel that their risk to their lives and safety have been adequately addressed by our federal government or the National Energy Board, which is now called the Canadian Energy Regulator, or CER. The CER has not required Trans Mountain to release a safety plan for the tank farm before construction. Many people who are very familiar with the hazards feel that there is no way to adequately ensure the safety of Burnaby residents if the tank farm is expanded. If elected, what would you do to protect us? Please begin, Mr. Beach. You are, but you were responding to Sven Robinson's 10 seconds.
We're alternating.
I'm fine with that.
Me?
Sure, Mr. Donald.
Actually, I have friends live only 500 yards around away from the old pipeline. There's no such things, the smell or hazard air coming from the pipeline, because I go there lots of times. And that's the first question. And also, so far when we built new pipeline, we use a new technology, strict regulation. So the operation is under very strict supervision. So it's supposed to be very safe. And the Kinder Morgan has estimated it's a 473 years possibly have a spill. 473 years. So we can imagine, in our lifetime, there's no such thing will spill. And also, pipeline is the safest way to transport the oil. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is a big one because I have personally experienced what it's like to be on the losing end of risks taken on my behalf. So I will do everything I possibly can to protect our community. And if they can spend $4.5 billion on a pipeline to expand something that is already too dangerous, they can spend at least $4.5 billion on protecting us. So we'll get everything we can. And that starts with making sure that we deal with the fumes and the gases, upgrading the tanks, and emergency response. If we can't get them to stop it. But of course, we're going to get them to stop the pipeline. We will not be having it because, as Sven said, in the minority parliament, it's not going to be part of any good climate plan. And we'll then work on getting the tanks off the mountain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson.
Yes, and thank you for the question. There are two key issues here. The first issue is the existing threat. The existing threat from the tank farm, serious concerns about that. The report that was done by retired structural engineer Gordon Dunnett, it should be read by everybody in this room because it calls for recognition that the existing tanks, which are 65, 66 years old, themselves are a threat. The second major area of concern, and this should be the end of the discussion around the expansion project, is the fact that the Chris Bocock report by the Burnaby Fire Department in 2014-2015 led to this conclusion by the Burnaby Fire Department. We oppose the tank farm expansion on the basis that the risks to health and life safety are simply far too high. This project is completely unacceptable to the fire department. If the fire department at Burnaby says this project is a risk, that should be the end of the discussion about the expansion of Trans Mountain Pipeline.
So I think the first thing I want everybody in this room to know is that Burnaby Mountain is my home. I went to school there, I went to faculty there, I lived there. My house where I will raise my daughter, I have the Kinder Morgan existing pipeline going through my front yard, and the expansion is framed to go through my backyard. So I'm very invested in this. I was the first MP or person, I think, to propose a credible economic way where we could actually move those tanks. There's a bunch of political trouble that gets in there, but the other thing I want everybody to know is June 1st, when the Prime Minister came down, I made it a priority that he met with the firefighters, that he met with Mayor Hurley, so they could talk about these safety issues. And if you want a full scope on how much work that I've been doing to pay attention to this, go to my website. This is a 250-page policy timeline that I put together. It has almost everything that I know that people are talking about in terms of concerns. Those concerns need to be addressed, and we need to fight for every resource to make sure if the project goes ahead.
Thank you very much. So we now move on to our third question, and there's been a request from the audience that the candidates stand when they address. So we'll begin that with this answer. This question is as follows. Fossil fuel subsidies are being given to companies who have made immense amounts of money and that continue to accelerate the climate crisis we are now facing. These subsidies have to include the degradation of our environment, cost of dealing with extreme weather events, and paying $4.5 billion for outdated pipeline infrastructure that is costing more in interest charges than revenue it receives, and is unlikely to ever make a profit. More jobs and economic benefits could be provided by funding a rapid change to renewable energy, increasing energy efficiency, and supporting regenerative agriculture. How do you propose to address this issue with the urgency required? Please begin, Ms. Cutter. Thank you.
Well, they're certainly playing with my future. They're playing with all of our futures. They're playing with the futures of our children by the choices that have been made. So I think the question itself outlines the plan. Any good climate plan means we change everything outlined here. And what that means is actually a much healthier society and a healthier economy as we change all these things. And I want to actually point out this bit of extreme weather. And right now, the way we're heading, if we just continue down the line, we're going to need a lot more money to respond to the effects and the suffering that will have been caused. So we choose our future by our investments. And we can reform an economy and create a new one that's regenerative, that actually works for 7 generations. And that's what I will work to build.
Thank you, Tim. And I just also want to acknowledge that there are some very significant health impacts of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion as well, which Professor Tim Tuccaro has outlined that I think we should be concerned about. And also, and so important, we acknowledge the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam. The Tsleil-Waututh and the Squamish people have been leading the fight against the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, and I honor and I thank them for their leadership in that very important. On fossil fuel subsidies, we should end all fossil fuel subsidies immediately. That's the only possible way that we can move forward. And I say yes, that means, of course, no subsidies whatsoever to any new oil and gas infrastructure, including the BC LNG project, which is being subsidized by the federal government. And we must move to a Green New Deal, which ensures respect for our environment and meeting the IPCC targets.
And Mr. Beach, would you like to respond, please, to this question?
I actually...
Could you stand, please?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say that if it's okay with the audience, I prepared a lot of notes, and I would really prefer to sit just so I can make sure I give you all the facts I prepared. I mean, is it okay with you if I sit? Is that going to offend anybody?
I think in terms of equality, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you. So there you go. Okay, so in terms of fossil fuel subsidies, so we have promised to end fossil fuel subsidies. We can't do it immediately for some very simple reasons. There are a number of indigenous communities that require diesel fuel, and that is subsidized. We have made it part of our 2019 platform, if we're re-elected, that we will make sure that all indigenous communities that are relying on diesel fuel today, subsidized diesel fuel, will have the electric infrastructure so that we can end those fossil fuel subsidies as well. We're also promising, we're phasing out coal. We're going to invest in green infrastructure. We've been investing in it. And 90% of our electricity is going to come from non-emitting resources by 2030. And we're going to be net zero by 2050. And we're going to have 5-year legally binding targets to make sure that we get there. If you read the work that we've done over the last 4 years, we've taken more action on climate change and the environment than any government before us. That's only a down payment, and we're going to do more.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dunn. Yes.
I would like to say, if we face the reality, so far the clean energy contributes less than 1% of the energy. So we still need the pipeline, need the gas. But for me, personally, and our party, we don't agree to subsidize any business. We believe small government and less spending for the government, but big investment for the society. That's our position. And when somebody say the crisis, climate crisis, I feel a little bit nervous because I think all here, lots of people older, they have grandchildren, they have children. If you always scare our young people, they have 3 choices. 1, they suicide. 2nd, they scare them. And they may go to the, drugs. Different drugs make them happy. That's why we oppose to say climate crisis. There's a climate change for sure,
Thank you,
but
Mr.
there's
Dunn.
no crisis. Thank you very much.
Okay. We'll now move on to the audience questions. Thank you all for your submissions. Yeah. So this one is on proportional representation, and it's to all of the candidates. Our last 2 Canadian majority governments were formed with about 39% of the vote. Many Canadians were disappointed that the government failed to listen to the experts and implement proportional representation. What will your party do to bring in proportional representation where 30% of the vote elects 30% of the MPs? And we will begin with Mr. Robinson.
Thank you. You all remember the promise that was made in 2015 that would be the last election under first past the post. Well, that promise was broken, and I am here to tell you that if I'm in a position, and if my colleagues are in a position, particularly in a minority government, that what we will say is that you will not get the support of the New Democratic Party, and my leader, Jagmeet Singh, has been very clear on this. You will not get the support of our party, you will not get the confidence to form a government unless you do 2 things. 2 key elements, and I think Elizabeth May has said the same thing. First, you will in fact move forward on electoral reform and honor the promise you made, and I support the mixed member proportional representation, but the key is in fact to move forward on electoral reform. And the second key element that we will insist on is that the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion will not go ahead, and you won't have our confidence if it does.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Mr. Beach.
So I've said this before, when asking this question, I just want to repeat again. I fully apologize. It was one of the promises that we said in absolute terms, so I apologize to anybody that's ever asked me about it. I apologize to all my volunteers. I was actually excited about electoral reform. I think I would enjoy an MMP system or some sort of proportional system. I mean, that's part of the problem. We need to define a specific proportional system. I just want everybody here to know what happened. There was a proportional committee that went across the country, and basically the deal they came out with was the Conservatives would agree if they went to a referendum, and the NDP and the Greens would agree if they had programs that were a certain level of proportionality under the Gallagher Index, which excluded the Prime Minister's preferred system. We had the numbers, we had the polls. If we did it, we took it out to a referendum, we would have lost. People told me, when I told them that explanation a year and a half ago, that is very politically expedient for you. We since had a referendum in BC, we had a referendum in PEI, the same thing happened. We spent $300 million and lost the referendum, we wouldn't be talking about electoral reform. But now the door is still open and we need to figure out how to do this.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn.
Our party position is don't change the electoral method right now. It's still the current one, but personally, I would like to have the change to the proportional electoral system because it's a benefit for the small party or not only the great party, right? But right now it's good because so far we are, on the table we are only the conservative side party. So because I just notified the conservative has no candidate for this riding anymore, and I think right now we are only focused on the pipeline. Actually, everybody is supposed to focus on economy, the tax. We will lower the income tax. We will lower the corporation tax. We will eliminate the capital gain. We will, eliminate the carbon tax. Everybody benefit for their housing issues. Lots of issues solved.
Thank you. And Ms. Goodman?
Yeah, so in proportional representation, I feel like it's a personal betrayal because I don't feel represented. It means there's a lack of diversity in our government and we don't actually have everyone in Canada having a voice. And that means government continues not to serve us on the whole. So yes, if we're in the position to say so in a minority government, we will make it a requirement, but instead of implementing one system, we will look to a citizens' assembly so that concerns around different systems are actually addressed. And since it was just mentioned, I want to use my time to talk about the fact that there is no Conservative candidate anymore. For those of you who haven't heard, the Conservative Party took their support away from the candidate because of things that she had said about sexual orientation and gender identity. And this is very personal for me, and I believe for Sven as well. And we're happy that somebody who wants to erase our identities is no longer a candidate.
We now have a few questions that are for specific candidates. First, I'll address this one to Mr. Beach. The Trudeau government promised in 2015 to end subsidies to fossil fuel companies, then used our tax to buy a pipeline, with more to come for the expansion. How can we believe any promises you make now?
So I just answered the question about the fossil fuel subsidies. For all the things that concern me about the Trans Mountain pipeline, the financing aspect of it is one of the lower concerns. A $4.5 billion purchase after capital gains is $4.1 billion. There is a guaranteed revenue stream, I believe even for a drop of oil to go through that pipeline. There's already been an offer for $6.9 billion. I think there will be other offers for that project. And I negotiated with the Prime Minister along with Joel Lightbound, an MP from Quebec City, that every dollar that's made in that pipeline, if it goes ahead, including the $500 million a year in extra tax revenue and the billions that could be made when the line is sold, if it moves ahead, would go to funding a low carbon transition fund. And yeah, I think that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And here is a question specifically for Mr. Robinson. How do you reconcile support of LNG and the damage to the environment it causes while you support mixing pipeline due to environmental concerns? This seems hypocritical.
Well, it would be hypocritical if that was my position, but that's not my position. I believe perhaps this question was written before I made my position clear on this issue. I absolutely oppose any federal subsidy, and currently the Liberals are giving $275 million to subsidize the BC LNG project. I have spoken out strongly against that. There are times when, you have to sometimes take on even your own comrades and friends to take a stand. And if you know my political history, I haven't been afraid to do that. I will stand up. And say absolutely that I oppose this project. I oppose it also because what's the source? It's from fracking, and fracking is environmentally destructive and should not be allowed in any jurisdiction. And finally, I oppose it because it shows a total lack of respect for Indigenous peoples and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So I oppose this project.
Thank you very much. And now another for Mr. Beach. Given your failure over the past 4 years to influence the Liberal Party decision on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, what makes you think that you will have any more success stopping this very dangerous project and represent your constituents in the future?
So that's a very fair question. I think it's a very fair question to ask everyone that's sitting on this stage about their ability to necessarily stop this project. What I can tell you is that I've been able to fight tooth and nail for a number of wins for the underlying concerns that you brought to me, whether that's going to your house because of construction noise or light noise or pollution in local streams, whether that's getting the salmon mats ripped out of the streams. I mean, I've gone toe-to-toe with the Natural Resources Minister. I've gone, many, I probably presented on this project to ministers and to cabinet and to more MPs than any other person in Canada. On those underlying issues, we've got an oceans protection plan. We've invested $17 billion in the Coast Guard, so our entire coastline is protected. I was the parliamentary secretary for all 6 of our major environmental bills. I went to Ottawa as a business guy, but the business case for protecting our environment is way too strong, so I guess I came back an environmentalist.
Thank you. This is to all candidates. As someone who's been homeless, whose family lost their small business of 18 years, so by eliminating the pipeline, how do you plan on solving all these issues without a way to supply jobs or income by cutting out so many jobs? Specifically, you've talked about childcare and supporting families and homeless. How is it you are planning to accomplish this? And the order of speaking would be you, Mr. Beach, first. Thank you.
There's a lot to unpack there. We have a national poverty strategy that is lifting Canadians out of poverty ahead of schedule over what we promised. It is planning to reduce homelessness by 50%. We have a $55 billion national housing strategy. I want to see what I get to here. $7.5 billion that we've invested in childcare. We know that living and affordability, especially in this part of Canada, has gotten real tough. And it's gotten tough because for 25 years, the federal government hasn't been investing in things like affordable housing. We have a very responsive government. Affordable housing, like I said when I first got up here, was one of the first presentations that I ever gave to my caucus. And now it's turned into $55 billion of real investment. When people come to my office with real concerns, I take it seriously. I do the economics, I do the policy work, I advocate strongly, and I get results.
Thank you very much. Ms. Pass.
Our strategy is put more money in your pocket, and you can spend that money for whatever you want. First, for the income tax, we only have 3 brackets. Under 15,000, there's no tax. Between 15,000 and 100,000, we have only 15% tax. Over 100,000, 25% tax. If you do a small business, the corporate tax for business lower from 50% to 10%, and the carbon tax will be eliminated. And we also eliminate supply management, which makes your family spend less, $600 to $800. And also the other things, we will make more money in your pocket. That's the solution for the childcare, whatever.
Finish. Thank you, Mr. Don.
We believe that the jobs that are created are a choice. So we can either choose to create jobs in the fossil fuel industry, or we can choose to create jobs elsewhere. So we would choose to create jobs elsewhere. We also want to make sure that housing is enshrined as a fundamental right, and that everyone has a home to return to. We also want to institute a guaranteed livable income to make sure that everyone has enough to make their ends meet every day, every month, every week. I am part of a generation now that we call ourselves the precariat, because we no longer have the stability to live, to know that we have enough money, our wages are stagnated, our costs are too high, and we can't afford to live month to month. So it's real, and there are way too many things to address in there than just jobs and housing, and we're going to look at them all.
Thank you. Housing, as Amita said, is a basic human right. The reality is that for over 25 years, the federal governments, both liberal and conservative, and by the way, of those 25 years that Terry said that there was negligence, 6 were conservative, 19 were liberal. Of those years, not a single unit of affordable rental housing, cooperative housing, seniors housing, or student housing has been built. Well, that's wrong. That is absolutely wrong. And in fact, in the last 4 years, in this constituency, in Burnaby North Seymour, there has been no federal units of housing built whatsoever. I'm here to say we have to change that, and certainly our mayor, the mayor of Burnaby, recently said the mayor said that money has been completely inaccessible under this liberal government. That has to change, and that has to change fast. And money laundering and speculation have to be addressed as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Another question for all candidates. Do you envision a day when the country is tied together by a network of passenger rail lines with Greyhound-style buses carrying people to the railway stops so that we can fly less and drive less to get across the country? Would your party work to promote this and subsidize private operators so that people in all communities can travel the country like they can in Europe? I believe we're starting with Mr. Donovan.
Okay, can I take it?
Yes.
Our party leader said we need a balanced budget in 2 years. You know, we cannot spend the money we don't have. So that's our position. Balanced budget in 2 years, and which means we don't let the burden for next, not only for us, and also for the next generation. Right now, we already have a 700 billion debt. Each year, we pay 26 billion interest, and in the current situation, the interest is very low. If we still pile up for our debt, it's projected for the next 4 years, another $94 billion debt in Myanmar. So we cannot afford this idea right now, at least right now. That's our position. Thank you very much.
We love the idea of lots of high-speed rail. I certainly do. We definitely want to have rail links between all communities and also other forms of public transit to make sure we can all get around safely. We also know that small businesses are the true drivers for our communities and our economies, so we want to make sure that they have the ability and the support to become the real drivers and supporters of every economic system that we have. I say it's necessary for safety because in the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit report, safe transit in rural areas was one of the very important things that we need. So other than for our climate future and for our ease of getting around the country, it is necessary.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a great idea. It's one that I strongly support. High-speed rail, not only across Canada, but also there's some really exciting possibilities down along down through Washington and Oregon as well that I know Mayor Kennedy Stewart has been actively working on with colleagues. So Absolutely. I think we also have to look at how can we electrify the federal government fleet. The biggest fleet of vehicles the federal government has is Canada Post vehicles, and CUPW has put forward a really exciting proposal about electrifying the fleet. And finally, when we look at one of the best ways that we can tackle the climate crisis, it's by a massive increase in federal government support for public transit. When I door knock on the North Shore, for example, of course, the number one issue I hear is we've got to have effective public transit, including a fixed link crossing across to the North Shore. And I'll fight hard for federal support for that as well.
So just very quickly, Rocky, if we eliminate the carbon tax, the BC one is provincially administered, so we would still end up paying it here. You're just promising to make sure Alberta, Manitoba, and Ontario don't pay. For AMITA, clean energy is currently outpacing fossil fuel under our plan. We do need to accelerate that. And for spend, we've got to stop saying these things. There's $4 million invested in 1,218 units in Burnaby North Seymour, $3.1 million invested in co-ops. That doesn't include the funding subsidies that have been renewed for co-ops until 2027. The mayor wants to build 1,000 units. It's the rezoning that's holding up those funds. It's not the federal government. Finally, I was the parliamentary secretary for transport until the last election. I think there's lots of crazy, exciting things, like hyperloops and the like. It's going to allow us to do a lot of neat things. We are expressly trying to get people into electric vehicles with our subsidy program, but we're moving on from that into trucks, buses, planes. The world's changing very fast. Canada needs to be at the front of it.
Thank you very much. I didn't catch who is holding up the subsidy for housing.
Yes, so very brief explanation. We've been meeting monthly. They can't get startup funding until the rezoning was done. The rezoning got held up because we wanted to put more density, so they've identified 6 sites. And you don't have unlimited land, so we wanted to maximize the density and get childcare in there. But you can't get the startup funding until you get the rezoning, and then afterwards they get the co-development funding, but the federal funding is there.
So it's rezoning that was holding
They
up.
don't need it in the summer, so it was held up until September. It should be going ahead. I'm not an MP right now, so I don't get to keep track of it.
Mr. Robinson would like to respond, I think, to this.
Are we allowed to respond?
Just one quick point. I mean, Terry has said that the federal government put money into co-op housing, and I challenge him here and now. Name one unit of new co-op housing, one unit anywhere in Burnaby North Seymour. There isn't anything.
Thanks. I'm sorry, I was asking to clarify. You got a chance to respond. Can I have the mic? Thank you.
He has a question. Yeah, he has just one more question. Just let him
Okay. Yeah, I was only asking because I didn't hear the answer of what was holding up the subsidy. You answered the question. I'd like to stop it here though. I have this. Yeah, there's a half hour afterwards that you can get any detail that you need. This is a question for all the candidates. What is the plan, or is there a plan, to implement nurse practitioners to help solve the shortage of designated health care providers, GP shortages, across the country? If so, when and how will this be implemented? And we'll start with Ms. Kuttner, please.
So, from my understanding, we have a complete lack of healthcare for many people across many, this disciplines is the wrong word. We're lacking health access for many people, so we want to support every single mean and way that we can get more healthcare to more people, and nurse practitioners is definitely one of those ways. So we'll be looking at evidence and seeing how can we get the most care to the most people, and this also means looking at health as a whole. So talking about how dental care is necessary, making sure that everyone has access to dental care, making sure we have a universal pharmacare program, and also completely bringing a new look at mental health care, because it's costing our system far too much. And so we want to make sure that everyone has access to many different sorts of mental health care as well.
And I agree with what the points that Lena made. In terms of healthcare, I think there are a couple of things. Obviously, the role of nurse practitioners is incredibly important and has to be expanded, and they have to have decent working conditions as well. We've also, I think, got to recognize that there's another significant issue in our community here in Burnaby North Seymour, and that's the real challenge in finding family doctors. I don't know how many of you have experienced that, but I know people that have been looking for a long time, and we have to do a lot better job in that area as well. But fundamentally, what we've called for and what our platform calls for, and I invite you to have a look at it. I don't refer you to my website quite as often as Terry refers to his website, but I do want to refer you to the website to have a look at our platform, which calls for basically head-to-toe coverage for healthcare, to include national pharmacare, dental care, optical care, eye care. That was the dream of the founder of Medicare, Tommy Douglas, and that's what I will fight for.
Thank you. Mr. Beach, please.
So when we signed the new health accord, we ensured there was $11 billion of new transfers that went into the healthcare system, specifically dedicated money so we ensured that there was going to be investment in mental health and in home care. We also were promising to implement pharmacare, and we've actually done a good job of reducing the cost of prescription drugs over the last 4 years. We also, in the 2019 platform, are guaranteeing every Canadian access to a family doctor. And I also want to mention that CARP, the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, came up with a list of 10 things they'd like us to do in 2015. I went to every retirement home this riding and promised that we would do their top 4 things. As of today, with the new platform, we've listed all 10, and I'd be happy to go into more detail on follow-up questions.
Thank you, Mr. Beach. Mr. Dolan, please.
Healthcare is exclusive provincial jurisdiction. So our party position is we will give up GST and let the provincial government keep that portion money to take care of the healthcare or medical care issues. And in the meantime, we set a condition, let provincial government to innovate and also fully responsible for their behavior and the results of their healthcare. That's our position.
Thank you very much. I will now go to a couple of individual questions. This one for Mr. Beach. I understand your position on Trans Mountain Pipeline and your assertion that you are Burnaby's voice in Ottawa. I need you to be Ottawa's voice. Why has your government not answered the 6 questions posed by the ministerial review of Trans Mountain Pipeline? And when can we expect an answer? We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on and countless hours over submissions.
So I've had 50,000 pieces of correspondence come through my office on the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I've endeavored to answer every single one. So if you want to give me those questions individually, follow up with me, and I'll happy to give it to you. We basically had every question you can imagine on this project, and we've done our best to write and put down in paper everything that we know. If there's a question specifically that's outstanding, I'll do my best tonight, and if I can't get you an answer tonight, I'll get you an answer tomorrow.
Thank you very much. And the next question is for Mr. Dong. If you are certain Kinder Morgan's safety statements around the pipeline and tank farm are correct, would you personally commit to paying from your own pocket any damages from a pipeline accident? After all, if you say there is no risk of an accident, you should not fear having to pay.
Actually, my personal suggestion for the pipeline, I understand people feel the safety issue. Like I said, the pipeline, there's several issues combined together. Environment and safety, definitely one of them. So my suggestion is we need let the company to buy the insurance for the surrounding residents. If something happened, the insurance will pay for the damage. If something happened, like I said, the Kinder Morgan had a report. It said it's 473 years, there's a possibility, there's a spill. And also another suggestion for me, another suggestion, I would like to build a circular wall around the tank, because if something happens, this the contain the spill, and also the pipeline, I will build the U-shape, the wall for the pipeline. If something happens, it contain the spill. That's my
Thank you
suggestion.
very much.
I'm not a scientist, right?
Thank you. So we will return now to questions for all the candidates. Bill C-16 has erased women's sex-based rights. How do you plan to correct this? And I believe we start, if my recollection is correct, with Sven.
Bill C, if I were to ask how many people know what Bill C-16 is, there would be very few people in the room, I suspect. How many people know what Bill C-16 is? A handful of people. Well, Bill C-16 is the legislation that was adopted recently in Parliament that said that there should be no discrimination on the basis of gender identity. What it does is recognizes, in my view, a very important reality that trans people too often are victims of violence and discrimination and should be treated with dignity and respect. I fully support the provisions of Bill C-16, and I'm really, really pleased that it was New Democrats that led the fight for that very important legislation that all of us, I think, hopefully, would honor and respect.
Well said. I agree with everything that Sven just said. I was very proud to be part of government that brought through C-16, and I'll support it. Oh, sorry, did the people in the back not hear me? I said that Sven, I think, did a very good job answering that question, and I personally am very proud of that bill, C-16, and I'm going to continue to support it.
C-16, the gender identity and gender expression. Our party respects LGBTQ plus group people, but we don't agree with C-16 because they quench the free speech. They put into the criminal code, they put into the Canadian Charter of Freedom and Rights. So if you call somebody wrong, their pronouns, you will be punished, maybe you charged. So that's why in Canada we're supposed to uphold the free speech. That's why our party position is we will repeal, if we elected our government, we will repeal C-16. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, that's not all right. So my pronouns are they, them. But no one will be punished for not using the right pronouns. That's not part of the bill. I fully agree with what's been said in the description of it. I would not support anybody actually being punished for not using it. You can call me she, you can call me he, you can call me they. Actually, I'm gender fluid, so they all apply. But it doesn't, that's not what it's about. It's about the right to exist, the right to be yourself, the right to define yourself the way you are. And everyone should have that right. It should be completely protected under the charter. But no one should be punished for making a mistake or not particularly getting it in any moment. And so that's not what we think about
it. Here is a question for all the candidates, and we will start up here with Mr. Beach. What do you plan to do about high retirement costs? Internet costs. Before you get started, I want to point out that there is in front of every speaker a foot, which is a gummy foot, and just in case they have a problem, they could have the foot in their own. But I did not get one of these. Mr. Reach, please.
The ingredients of this gummy foot?
The ingredients of the gummy foot. Yours is red, so I would imagine it has red dye number letter 2.
As long as it wasn't an illegal gummy foot from 2 years ago.
Not that, actually, I can't vouch for that. Please, regarding internet costs, yes.
So for internet and for wireless, we're taking a similar approach. So this would apply to your cell phone, it applies to the internet. We've mandated the CRTC to take a consumer-first approach. And so what we're going to do is we're going to negotiate on behalf of the consumer. What happens right now is the major telcos get to negotiate with the smaller players, and they can negotiate the rates that they give access to their lines to, and they can inflate it to a point where they're not really competitive and they can't really compete. So we're going to do that negotiation on their behalf. We're going to give them 2 years to get prices down 25% from where they are today, and if they don't get there, we're going to make sure that we take further legislative action to make sure they get there. For an average family, it's a savings of about $200, $250 a month.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas?
Actually, our leader, Maxi Bernier was the previous Minister of Foreign Affairs, previous Minister of Small Business and Tourism, and also previous Minister of Industry. He was commented as the greatest Minister of Industry for the past 30 years. And he suggests to completely remove the CRTC and introduce more competitions. So when there's more competitions, the price will come down for sure. That's our position. Thank you very much.
It was $250 a quarter, not a month.
Thank you. Ms. Good.
Access to internet has now pretty much become necessary for all our lives, so we want to make sure that we lower the price absolutely. We want to challenge the conglomerates. I think the stuff that the Liberals are proposing is a good first step, but we need to go way further in terms of actually providing internet access in rural areas as well, and making it as easy as possible for there to be small business competition to the big companies that are currently owning the industry. And so cell data, but as well as home internet costs are something that we are considering.
Thank you, and I would say certainly again in our platform we made it very clear that we are very seriously looking at how can we most effectively reduce both internet costs and cell phone costs to have fair plans for that. One of the challenges with the current government has been the extent to which they have been actively lobbied by the big telecom companies over 800 times in the last 4 years. The only ones that have been more effective as lobbyists have been Big Pharma and oil and gas with this government, and of course SNC Lavalin. But the fact of the matter is that the prices are in fact far too high. And I want to just come back. I want to give Terry that opportunity he wanted to tell us where the new co-op housing has been built in our riding.
You have 15 seconds according to the timer.
Ladies and gentlemen, I used to build condominiums. And so when you come up with a $55 billion housing strategy, the first thing you gotta do is you gotta go lobby to get that money in the first place. It takes a couple of years. And then you gotta decide where to invest in. You can't just throw it at a problem. You need to make sure that it's going to the right places. You should go to seniors' housing, you should go to students' housing, you should go to homelessness or shelters. And then once you decide where that money's gonna go, you gotta go work with the cities and the provinces to co-fund with the private sector, very complicated.
I'm sorry, that's
the money's coming. The money's coming to build these units.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a question to all the candidates. Why does a Green New Deal need proportional representation? Is this true? Mr. Donald, you're up. Why does a Green New Deal need proportional representation?
Okay, that's excellent. Actually, personally, I would like all of energy coming from the Green Deal. But the reality is, 99% still need the traditional energy, which is the gas, coal, these kind of things, So that's why I don't know the proportion.
Okay, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that.
The proposal for a Canadian Green New Deal is very important because it's an idea that would bring all parties together to face our crisis of many forms, and largely the climate emergency. And it is centered around the concept of justice, having to do with a just transition for every single worker, as well as Indigenous rights and sovereignty. This also means a diversity of representation. So it would be improper and incomplete to have a Green New Deal without proportional representation.
And I agree. I think that when we're looking at transforming our economies, we have to do, if we're serious about responding to the IPCC report, clearly that means that there's got to be economic transformation, that means that there's got to be social transformation, and there has to be transformation in how we govern ourselves. And that means effectively electoral reform, and I think, as I said before, proportional representation is certainly the way to do that. I think also we have to recognize that in order to move forward on a Green New Deal, because it is a pretty significant proposal in terms of the transition, that we're going to have to work across party lines to make that happen. And certainly that's something I'm very much committed to do as well.
So many aspects of the Green New Deal are already underway and have been activated over the last 4 years. We put a national price on pollution. We've invested over $30 billion in green infrastructure. We're invested $28.7 billion in public transit, invested in oceans protection plan, $1.3 billion in biodiversity and species at risk, $167 million for our endangered whales, $142 million for our wild salmon. Our MPAs, our oceans, we had less than 1% protected in 2015, we're at 14% now. We're promising to get to 25% of land and water by 2025. We have tertiary treatment coming into the Lionsgate facility, a $750 million investment. We have a low carbon fund, we have a green municipal fund. We're going to ban single-use plastics by 2021. In Shadowline, 2 days ago, there was an economist, a climate scientist that graded all the plans for their feasibility to stop climate change. The Conservatives got an F, the Liberals got an A, the Greens got a C minus, the NDP got a D. Thank you.
This is a slippery slope. I'm sorry, I can't do that. But there is an opportunity at the end in your closing statement to correct anything that you would like. Here is another climate change question. This is for all the candidates. Climate change is inevitably interconnected with colonization, patriarchy, and exploitation. How are you going to, and how have you addressed these underlying issues in Burnaby North Seymour community? And I believe we are starting, yes, with Ms. Karen.
Again, all things that I've experienced myself and directly influence the charting that we have to do ahead to actually come build a just society that takes into account the many crises that we face. So my work so far while I was in university had to do with smashing the patriarchy, diversity and inclusion, which was challenging, of course, an establishment that was deeply colonial and hierarchical in ways that is set to not serve everyone. So I've done this work, I know it, and that is what I will bring to government. Within government, I will challenge the colonial system, I will challenge the hierarchy, I will challenge the systems that are constantly keeping out our voices.
Thank you very much.
I think this is one of the greatest challenges that we face. And when we look at the challenge of patriarchy, of colonialism, I think the wake-up call that we got from the Commission on Missing and Murdered Women and Indigenous Girls has to spur all of us to action, to recognize that that genocide that they described was unconscionable, and we owe it to do everything in our power to change that. We also, in my view, have to do far more, just in terms of gender equality generally. One of the most important things that we can move forward on is a universal public child care program. It's long overdue. I remember the promises that were made 25 years ago. We hear those promises again. I'm committed to doing everything I can to fight for a universal child care program and to make sure that women are treated with the dignity and respect that all citizens are entitled to.
Working with Indigenous communities over the last number of years has been one of the great privileges of having this job. I want to say some of the things that we've done working with Indigenous peoples. We've lifted 87 water advisories. We're going to have them all lifted by 2021. We're committed to implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. We're implementing the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Women Inquiry Calls to Justice. The average Indigenous person looking to go to post-secondary is now getting $13,000 a year. We've invested in housing and education. We've settled 100 specific historical claims, which is twice the rate of any government before us. We have promised in our 2019 platform that all Indigenous communities will have all major infrastructure needs by 2030: housing, roads, internet, schools, health. We have to do better for our Indigenous children. They're 8% of the population and 50% of the foster child population, and we're going to implement UNDRIP in our first year of our mandate before we win.
Please stand, sir.
Okay.
It'll be good for your legs.
Like I said, our party has four principles: one respect, one responsibility, one fairness, and one individual freedom. So for the respect, we will respect the First Nation rights, and we will replace the Indian Act with the I take a look.
Other legislation.
Sorry. No. Sorry. But we will work with the First Nation people and build the pipeline and the infrastructure, and we make sure the benefits for the First Nation people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, this next question is for all candidates, and it goes as follows. While many approaches are needed to lower global warming, what do you think is the single most important and effective initiative that will have the biggest impact in the shortest time frame? And I think it's for you, Mr. Robinson.
I think probably the single most important thing we can do as a community, as governments, and as leaders is frankly to listen to the voices of our children, like Greta Thunberg, who are telling us that the planet is on fire, and that we have a moral obligation to our children and our grandchildren to respond. If there's one thing that we do, it's listening to them, but not just listening to them with respect, but acting on what they are calling for us to do, which is, of course, to recognize that we do have a limited amount of time, that we have to cut off all fossil fuel subsidies and make a rapid transition to a renewable green economy. If we can do that, if we can respect Indigenous peoples and listen to the voices of Indigenous peoples in this process as well, we will honor the work that Greta Thunberg is asking us to undertake.
Yeah.
The number one thing that we can do also happens to be one of the top three things I'm most proud of that we've done in the last 4 years, and that is implement a national price on pollution. We need to make sure that there is an economic incentive for every individual in this room and every person across the country, and hopefully throughout the world, to make the right energy decisions. By putting it, we not price the actual true cost of that pollution. By doing it now, and returning those funds, making it revenue neutral, returning those funds to our population, we have a tool that we can increase and accelerate over time. There's a lot of debate here tonight about a pipeline, right? Parties are here talking, they're not talking about necessarily shutting down the oil sands, right? You really need to think, the question you need to ask yourself is, why is it profitable for that product to go through that pipeline in the first place? So it doesn't go through a pipeline, it's going to go on rails, it's going to go on trucks. We want to transition to energy efficiency, sustainable energy. We need to make sure that we have a strong pricing of pollution and it continues to go up over time in a predictable way.
Like I said before, we believe there's a climate change, but we don't believe that climate emergency or climate crisis because in Canada we have 347 million hectares trees. So each hectare will absorb 6.4 cubic tons CO2, which is more than 2.2 billion cubic tons. But every year, our Canada only emit like 700 million cubic. So our capacity is actually 3 times than the current we emit. So why we need a worry? You know, if you want to, if you want to do something for our environment, actually you need to do basic things. You plant more trees or recycle those kind of things. It's enough. You know, in China, there's 200 million hectares, but they emit 10 billion cubic tons. That's why there's a pollution there. We don't have pollution there. You know,
Thank you,
don't,
Mr. Dunn.
you know,
Your time's up.
I would like to know what a cubic ton is, please. What is it? No, later. I don't know what a cubic ton is. I'm a scientist. I know metric tons, not cubic tons. The biggest thing that we can do is to work together across party lines. So what we want to do is we want to form an all-party climate cabinet, a war cabinet, to face the problems that we have, to make sure that we all get on the same page. We talk about what matters to every single person in this country. We are already experiencing the effects of the climate crisis. We may be feeling it less here right now than our privilege, but across the global south, people are already losing their families and their homes and their lives and their livelihoods. So, yeah. Just saying it's not the way we usually measure it. So it's really important that we get together and actually work on this both in Canada in a climate cabinet and also across the world in a cabinet together.
Thank you. And this is a multi-part question. I think I will just start with the first one. It's for all candidates. Why did the Ethics Committee expunge the minutes of an official meeting? And I don't have any other details on this one. Do you want to try?
So if this happens to you at SNC, I have a feeling it does, although it's not quite clear. When this happened, I had an open house for everybody to come. People in this room that came. I took Easter and I got 112 pieces of correspondence, and I took Easter and responded to every single question that was asked of me for everybody in the riding. If anybody here is interested in reading that document, just send me an email.
Are there any other comments on the Ethics Committee expunging minutes of official meetings?
Yeah, I think one of the most serious issues, this is of course about the SNC Lavalin investigation and the independent ethics commissioner who was tasked to review this, is that he asked for all records, including records of cabinet confidences. Those records, in fact, had been turned over in 2006 by former Prime Minister Paul Martin. This government and this Prime Minister refused to turn over those key records, which in fact would disclose what actually happened with Jody Wilson-Raybould, with Jane Philpott, and the Ethics Commissioner said that this was completely unacceptable. I agree, and if there is a minority government, certainly one of the things we'll want to do is to ensure that there is a full independent inquiry into exactly what kind of pressure Jody Wilson-Raybould was put under in order to satisfy SNC Lavalin.
And are there any other responses? Would you like? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll second that, and I'll also say that if things belong on the public record, they definitely shouldn't be removed from them. And if we're in the process of investigating anyone or anything or an ethical violation, that the public has the right to see what was said.
would you like to respond to that?
I agree with Stephen Lawson.
Okay, thank you. This is a sort of tricky one for all the candidates. When will Trans Mountain profits start improving the environment? I think if you want to try and go ahead.
Because there's a lot of permits need to be approved in order to go ahead for the Trans Mountain. But the estimate for the Trans Mountain for the next 20 years will be have a $47.6 billion revenue for the pipeline. And BC will get $5.7 billion, and Alberta will get 19.some billion dollars. The other 20-some billion shared by the Canada other place. Thank you.
Thank you. One more. Oh, yes, sorry, please. Usually we're jumping at this.
I think we're currently in the negative side of that, so I'm not really sure when the positive side will come.
And I'd like to say, I hope it never comes. I hope the expansion project is killed.
I'm going to take some privilege to talk about this cabinet confidence thing that was shared by my fellow members. Cabinet confidence has only been released, I think, maybe Cabinet confidence, I just want to talk about cabinet confidence. It's only been released 2 or 3 times in the history of the country. There are very important reasons to why cabinet confident information is kept in confidence. It's for our benefit, actually. So it's not just as simple as everything needs to be open to the public. Some of that stuff is not in our best interest to be open to the public. And also, Jody Wilson-Raybould will testify that all information that was needed to be assessed has been put into the public forum. She did, she testified that. I've talked to her personally, she's remembering that. In terms of profits, I mean, if it goes ahead, if there is a purchase, it would be immediately that funds would go into a green transition fund. It is estimated that the increased taxes from the increased pricing you would get from accessing markets outside the United States would be about $500 million a year.
Thank you. This question is for all the candidates and extends the questions about climate crisis. The climate crisis is an existential threat. Do you think increased militarization, lack of getting rid of nuclear weapons, and the arms trade are equal existential threats? And I believe we are with Mr. Dong, I think, regarding existential threat of militarization, lack of getting nuclear weapons, and the arms trade.
I heard you said the environment threat, right, equal to militarized threat.
The militarization, lack of getting rid of nuclear weapons, in other words, nuclear weapons, and arms trade are equal existential threats.
I don't deal with that question, but I'm thinking the climate is not right, and sorry, I don't know.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I think the climate crisis increases the threat of militarization. I think the evidence shows that as temperature rises, we actually have increased conflict. So they're interconnected. We are facing a number of existential threats, and it's hard to tell which one is the biggest one because they all depend on different factors. So things can change very quickly, and I am not a fortune teller. I am also concerned about and that are really big, including things and developments in nanotechnology, biotechnology, and artificial intelligence. So I think we need to look very carefully at existential threats globally and definitely work on getting rid of nuclear proliferation because that would decrease threat a lot.
Thank you.
And I thank the questioner for that, because I think all three of the issues that have been identified, militarization, nuclear weapons, and the arms trade, are incredibly serious threats. When I had the honor of being a member of Parliament, I fought hard against the expansion of nuclear weapons and for the abolishment of all nuclear weapons. All you have to do is see the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to know that never again should nuclear weapons be even on the radar in this country or in this planet. On the arms trade, I also want to say that I think Canadians should be appalled that this Liberal government continues to sell arms to the Saudi regime, which is responsible for genocide in Yemen, which was responsible for murdering a respected journalist, Khashoggi. Those arms sales should end immediately, and certainly it's shameful that Justin Trudeau continues to say we're setting the issue. That should end now.
Thank you.
I don't have time to fully address Saudi Arabia. It was a decision made by the previous government. It was a decision made by the previous government, and it's got some challenges. I think, in answer to this question, that our two biggest existential threats are both actually environmental. One is climate change, which is a classic tragedy of the commons, where people act in their best interest, not in the interest of everyone else. It's a classic need for better governance, things like putting a price on pollution. And the second tragedy of the commons is protecting our oceans. Acidification, plastics in our oceans. If we continue dumping plastics into our oceans at current rate, we'll have more plastic in the ocean than biomass by 2050. So we're going to ban single-use plastics by 2021, and there's a big negotiation happening in 2020 in terms of oceans governance. It's going to be very important that we have a strong leadership team there so that we can start making sure that we protect all those areas that are outside of 200 miles from our borders.
Thank you very much. This is a question for all candidates, and we'll be starting with Amita. How will you ensure the new jobs created in the marine sector goes to Canadians and not foreign workers? Most tankers are flagged in countries of convenience and do not have to follow our working codes.
Our current deals that we have with different countries and how we regulate labor have been unfortunate for Canadian workers and Canadian companies. So we actually want to reevaluate the deals that we've made to make sure that we protect workers everywhere, but also make sure that we allow for prioritization, that Canadians get jobs. And this comes again to our own ability to create our jobs. So we do not have control over everything, but we do have control over making sure that we guarantee that every person has access to meaningful work, good wages, and the ability to support a family.
Thank you.
And certainly I echo that. Many Canadians don't know that at the end of World War II, we actually had one of the largest merchant marine fleets in the world. And certainly it seems to me that that's something that we should be looking at very seriously. When I first ran for public office, I had some signs that were made up, election signs, that said our products and our ships. And I think that's a great way of creating quality jobs in Canada. Certainly, when we talk about working conditions, we have to recognize the critically important role that the elected representatives of workers in this industry play. And I'm talking about the unions that are front and center in protecting the rights of those workers in this industry. It's very important. And finally, I think it's also important that while there's been some significant steps forward on shipbuilding, I think it's tragic that we had to go to Poland to build ferries for British Columbia. There's something wrong with that picture.
So there's a lot of things to get into here. First of all, I was involved in the pilot jack. We have some of the best marine pilots in the world, especially here on the BC coast. Thank you. We have a made in Canada solution for skills training to make sure that we're filling the skills gaps. And one of the problems we have is the lowest unemployment rate in the history of our country. So there are skills shortages and labor shortages. Some of that's attached to the housing affordability problem as well. We've also mandated the global skills program so that companies can get the talent that they need if it's not available and if we're not able to train. I think we need to think about electrifying our transport fleets, getting ahead of where this entire economy is going. I think that we're going to be able to get to fully electric transportation vessels very soon. And in terms of shipbuilding, we're talking about a $17 billion investment in renewing the entire Coast Guard fleet. We have 3 operating shipyards with 20 years worth of guaranteed work. The idea that there's some sort of travesty in shipbuilding, no, the Liberal government has made the biggest investment in shipbuilding in our country, and we should all be proud of it.
Thank you. Please, Ted.
I'm thinking because we lowered the tax, income tax, corporate tax, and the limited capital gain, which will boost our economy, create jobs, and that's our solution. But for the marine, we don't have that platform right now. I think, at least my personal.
Okay, thank you. And now a question for all candidates. What specifically are you going to do to reduce the over-incarceration of Indigenous people in the criminal justice system? And as a related question, what are you going to do to address the generational trauma experienced by our Indigenous peoples? And I believe we're starting with you, so, yeah.
This is an issue that tragically has been, unfortunately, has been going on in our country for generations. I worked as a justice spokesperson for my caucus and my party. I visited many of those prisons, including the prison for women. And it is absolutely unbelievable when you look at the actual numbers. Over 25% of the women in federal institutions, in fact, are Indigenous women. And of course, that's far, far higher. That over-representation, of course, is partly a reflection of the tragic reality of poverty that too often we face in Indigenous communities. The concept of restorative justice is one that I think we have to look at very seriously. I gave a lecture on this subject at the Iona Canton Law lecture some time ago, working with Indigenous leaders. I think we have to look at restorative justice. We've got to recognize that incarceration is too often a failure of the justice system instead of using restorative justice.
Thank you very much.
Forward.
And Mr. Beach.
I agree with the comments that Sven just made. I also think that we can do more to co-invest with Indigenous communities. So in addition to restorative justice, we're talking about making sure that there are proper health facilities and infrastructure on site. We've set aside $200 million specifically for substance abuse, $118 million for Indigenous mental health services. And on a more positive side, going into the future, ensuring that 5% of federal contracts are targeted towards Indigenous-run businesses. Shared revenue on resource projects that either impact or go through Indigenous territory. I personally see Indigenous people as the future leaders of our country. They already are leaders, but they're the fastest growing group of Canadians. They're the most impoverished group of Canadians, which means if we invest, it's the greatest opportunity to improve quality of life and to make Canada stronger as a whole.
Thank you.
Our party position is we will try to send clean water to the First Nation reserves because some First Nation reserves still doesn't have clean water and lower standard. So that's the first. The second, we will work with the first Aboriginal community and build the infrastructure and the pipeline and try to benefit for the Aboriginal community. And even for the Trans Mountain pipeline, actually, the journalist drive from Alberta to Vancouver, and he even interviews a First Nation group leader. Actually, there are 43 Aboriginal community agree this pipeline, so it's boost our economy. That's why our party position, we will build the pipeline with the First Nation together. And last year, the government just spent $22.1 billion
Thank
for
you
the
very much.
issues.
Thank you. And Amita.
Indigenous over-incarceration and intergenerational trauma are truly unacceptable realities that we face at the moment. And I think that the answers begin with full implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, full implementation of UNDRIP, as well as all the recommendations of the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit People report. But I think part of over-representation in incarceration has to do with the fact that we are actually incarcerating people who have not committed any crime. So I recently learned that Indigenous people are often incarcerated when they call in the suicidal. That is not a crime, and they should not be there. So to actually deal with this, we have to address institutionalized racism in every single government department, and we need to talk about trauma. I've experienced it, and deal with compassion.
Next question, incidentally, the questions are closed. I have more than enough to get us through the next 10 minutes before we start the closing statements. Excuse me? Right. Thank you. Would you reopen, this is a question for everyone, would you reopen the bill on the right to die to make it more broad?
So one of the first pieces of legislation when I was an MP was the medical assistance in dying legislation. It was hotly debated by all parties. It was one of the best processes that I went through in the entire 4 years. When it came out, it was taking cautious steps to make sure that we had the adequate protections in place to protect vulnerable people. But we had always promised that once it was in place, we would assess and we would look at the ability and the opportunity to go further to make sure that people can die in dignity. And I'm very happy to, I would just take this opportunity to thank Sven for his leadership in bringing forward this issue. And I'm very proud to be part of the government that took action on this.
Thank you. I'm sorry? Oh, you're passing? Okay.
I would also like to thank Sven for his work on this. I would not reopen the conversation and simply continue it and make sure that we are providing service in a way that is just and safe and hopefully actually adequate for everyone.
Thank you, and Terry and Amina, thank you so much, because certainly one of the greatest privileges that I had in my time in public office was working with a remarkable, incredibly courageous woman named Sue Rodriguez, who led the fight. It was wonderful to see that the Supreme Court of Canada in 2015 in fact ruled unanimously that this is a basic right of all Canadians. That was the Carter decision in the Supreme Court of Canada. Unfortunately, the legislation that the government introduced does not honor and respect the Carter decision. So in answer to your question, yes, absolutely, I would reopen that legislation. And there's a couple of key areas. One is advance directives. If you're diagnosed with serious dementia or Alzheimer's, you should have the right to be able to say, look, at the point that I don't want to continue going, based on my partner or my child, I should have the right to honor that, and have that request honored. The law doesn't do that, and it should do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much to everyone. This is a question for Mr. Robinson and Ms. Kuttner, who I've gotten to know so well that I'm going to start calling them Anita and Sven. Then I can avoid the foot in mouth disease. This question is, you seem to agree on everything. What is the difference between you as candidates? Anita, if you could start with that. What is the difference between you two as candidates?
We do agree on a lot.
Do you mind standing?
Yes, I'm standing, so I was working on. The difference. Unfortunately, I think the difference has a lot to do with our lived experiences and what we bring to the table, what we do, what we know. So we approach things differently in general. I have worked largely on diversity in my education. I think about space a lot. I know science stuff. That doesn't sound a very sciencey answer, but it is true. But I think really the difference is that I come from a party that lets me be entirely me, and I will not have to fight them on anything. I have their full support. They have my support, but also I have their ear, which means I directly influence policy, and within any government, I will not have to fight them on anything, but rather work together.
And certainly I have great respect for Anita. It's been a pleasure to get to know her and work with her on this journey of this campaign. As I do, by the way, for Elizabeth May, who's a friend of over 30 years and someone else who's made an important contribution to our country, particularly on climate issues. In terms of differences, I think, as Anita says, some of it is life experiences. And I'd like to think that what I bring to the table at this critically important time, 25 years of experience that I have had serving our community and working effectively in our community. Another decade working at the international level as a senior diplomat at the Global Fund. I think that when we talk about the climate crisis, for example, the day after the election, we've got to be able to hit the ground running. And I certainly hope to be able to be a part of that climate cabinet that's been talked about and put that experience to work on behalf of the people of this country. Thank you very much.
I think this will be the final question, unless candidates burn through the answer on this. This is for all the candidates. And I would like there to be a yes-no answer first, and then you can explain what you mean. But I think it's important to get a yes-no on this. Will you work with MPs from other parties to cut off public funding for construction on the Trans Mountain Pipeline and oil tanker expansion?
No. Because we feel we need to build the pipeline. That's the reason. So we do not need to work with other parties, because right now we see Green and NDP, they don't like this idea. So there's no way to work with them. So far, the Liberal Terry Beach, the Liberal Party approved the pipeline, but it's only one to oppose the pipeline. So how do we work with them? So that's my answer.
Okay, and you didn't get your exercise that time, but I'll let you off. I mean, sorry. No deep vein thrombosis for you.
Yes. And on top of that, we want to make sure that everyone, though, who could be possibly negatively affected by this change is not negatively affected by it. So we want to make sure that every worker that is affected by this has a just transition, has provided with reskilling, provided with an interim support so they never have to suffer from a transition that is necessary.
And again, certainly my answer to that is absolutely yes. And I think that we are at a critical point now when we compare 4 years ago, the promise that was made 4 years ago by the Liberal candidate for Prime Minister and the Liberal candidate in this constituency. Communities must give consent before a pipeline goes ahead. And I see this young man has a sign here to that effect. Indigenous peoples must give their consent, their full consent, before this pipeline expansion project goes ahead. And we will not use the discredited Harper environmental assessment process. The tragic reality is that our community clearly has not given its consent, and Terry has agreed with that. Indigenous peoples, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, have certainly not given their consent. And the Harper environmental assessment process was what was used by the Liberal government, and the Federal Court of Appeals said that it displayed contempt for Indigenous peoples, ignored marine safety, ignored the threat to the southern resident orca, and that is not
Thank
acceptable.
you very much.
So just in response to that last comment about the Harper NEB process, there was an additional process. I participated in it. We have revised the environmental assessments for future projects as well. So there's a little bit of stretching of the truth in that statement. In terms of yes or no questions, I never answer yes or no questions. Because you can laugh, I'll tell you why. These are very complicated issues. And I would suggest everybody here, if you're a person that gives you a very simple solution to a complicated problem, there's very few members of parliament that physically write down what they're feeling about issues. So you always know where I stand. Sometimes it takes me a few more words than two or one to get my true opinion out. Yes, I will work with all parties. I am nonpartisan. I'm only liberal during elections. Once I am elected, it is my job to represent everyone. That's why everybody in this room, some of them clearly not liberal, have been in my office and have worked with me on projects like this, and I've worked with Elizabeth May and MPs like Finn Donnelly, and every piece of environmental legislation I worked on as a parliamentary secretary, I worked with members of other parties to bring it on.
Thank you very much.